Okay, we'll get started. And before I get too far, I need to let you know before I forget. Um, I'm going to do the Women of Valor um, retreat next weekend. And I know it's also Labor Day weekend. And so I don't think we'll be back in time um, Monday to where we can have class Monday night as scheduled. However, um, I will be back, Bezrat Hashem, um, Tuesday, in time to have the Tuesday class. So there will be a class on Tuesday that you will get the recording for. And I'll go ahead, like I do sometimes when I have to miss on Tuesday, I invite them to the Monday night class if they want to come and if they can come and if it fits their schedule. And if not, no worries. But I'll do the same, just reversed next week, where I won't be here for Monday night, but I will for Tuesday. I'll go ahead and extend that invitation to everybody in the Monday night class to also be able to join the Tuesday class live if you want to and if your schedule permits it. And by the way, that Tuesday class, any of you that would like to tune into both of them, or at least be on the invitation list for both of them, there's plenty of room unless I had 100 people online, it wouldn't be a problem. So if you ever say, I'd like to get an invitation to both classes, it doesn't cost any more money. As long as you're in room, I don't care. And as long as my Zoom costs are covered, I don't care. So anytime you want to do that, you're welcome to, because some people have schedule changes and it works out better for them to go to one class or the other. And sometimes maybe if they're off for a season, then they might like to join in both of them. So the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. So just let me know. But I did want to let you know that next week I don't plan on having the Monday night class, and then after that, everything should be normal up until Sukkot, and then we'll figure that out as we get closer to Sukkot. And I look at flight schedules and those sorts of things. And but anyway, I am looking forward to Sukkot already. I don't know if you are, but when we go through this Torah portion, Reeh, there is a summary again of the foot festivals, the three main festivals, which are going to be Passover with unleavened bread, the first fruits of the wheat, or the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, and then Sukkot. So it's kind of a reiteration of things that we already know, but it's more of an isolation upon the foot festivals, is what they're called, or the walking festivals. And I think there's a reason that there's a spotlight on the walking festivals, and we'll get to those scriptures. I don't know if I've ever done it with you guys before, but I have a miniature presentation on the way. And in Hebrew, it is Haderek. And it basically just follows all the scriptures that tell us how we should walk in the way. And again, that goes back to Genesis 2, which we're going to just hit on that a little bit tonight. But anytime we're talking about walking in the way, just go ahead and put it in the context. He's talking about walking in the commandments. He's talking about walking in obedience to the commandment and the covenant very specifically. So when he isolates our foot festivals in this Torah portion, then I think it'll start to make sense, especially when we see and trace it back to its roots, no pun intended, to the garden. So let me start a screen share. And it's just, this week it's a lot of scripture more than anything, because there's such a repetition. And remember, when there's repetition of ideas, it's because there's something about that he wants us to pay attention to. So he's used this valuable real estate to keep restating a concept. And so that's what we're going to do. We're just going to try to trace why he might be repeating this concept of the place where I will put my name. Okay, so the Torah portion is Reeh, and you've got your references there. You've got the Torah, the Haftorah, the traditional psalm. And by the way, when I put these psalms on here each week, I don't know if I've ever even explained that to you. Let me stop sharing a sec so I can show you. Well, it was just in my hand. There it is. Show you what I'm talking about. The psalms that I do put on the readings with the Torah and the Haftorah each week, of course, the Brit Chadashah reading is completely up to where I'm taking the lesson. And that's the beautiful thing about the New Testament, where it really is a restatement of the Torah. There's a lot of flexibility in the verses you can choose. And so I just, this week, decided to kind of continue our context in John about if you love me, keep the commandments, because there's a wider context. But the Psalms are not random. A lot of people don't know it, but there are assigned Psalms to each of the Torah portions. And so this is what I'm going by. I've got a little reference here, and I cannot even tell you where I got it. It's just a copy. Obviously, I made the copy out of some book somewhere. So, the best I could probably do is take a picture of, because there's two sections. If I open it up, and one is for the Haftorahs, or Torah and Haftorah, it'll give you the specific psalm. And if you've actually been reading those psalms that I put on the first slide, you'll notice that the themes are identical to the Torah portions in the Haftorah. They're not random at all. And a lot of times it'll open up again, just like the Haftorah gives you more insight into what's going on in the Torah portion. If you read the assigned psalm, it'll do the exact same thing. So we're going to do that this week. I wanted to give you an idea of how tightly the themes are wound. And then up here, it's a different set of readings, not a different set of readings. It's a different cyclical process that I don't really use. Where, like, if somebody wanted to read the whole book of Psalms in a week, it's broken down like that. But this is the section that I'm using each week, which is the psalm that goes with each Torah portion. And then on this other side, there's psalms for special days. So like the first day of Passover, the second day of Passover, Sukkot, the 9th of Av, Shavuot, the fast of Esther, all these special occasions, they actually have a psalm for that too. And, it's one of those things that you may not want to do it every year, but one year, and we have a turn of the year coming up at Sukkot. And so at the turn of the year, when we start the new Torah portions, it might be a good time to say, you know what, I'm going to incorporate the weekly psalm, or I might do the weekly psalm, and I might also incorporate the special psalms that go with the feast days, and just try that for a year. And again, see if it opens up understanding, especially if you've been doing Torah portions for several years and you're looking for something to wake up your personal study time. Hopefully I'm waking you up and not putting you to sleep, but I'm always looking for I don't want to call it routine, but the cyclical resources, because they're systematic. They help you to study systematically. And that's the way we are as human beings. We grow since, I started to say Cincinnati. Oh my goodness. That's what happens when you have a conversation about Cincinnati before you have class. Systematically. as a human being, you didn't skip from age 1 to age 7 to age 3 to 93. That's not how you grew. You grew in a constructive order. And so when I find study resources that go with my established order, that's when I know I've found something I can probably stick with. Because if I don't already have the routine, you guys know how hard it is to make a new routine and stick with it. That's why New Year's resolutions always fail. If it's not already woven into your routine, it's going to be really hard to carry through. And so something like this, you already have a study routine. And you're just folding in a new ingredient into it rather than reading the Psalms maybe haphazardly. And if you're like me, you probably went through a season, because I knew the New Testament so well growing up. I'd memorized 5 books of it when I was in high school. I already had that foundation. So when I went back and started putting that same intensity into the Torah, certain things fell by the wayside. And one of the things that fell by the wayside, of course, was a psalm, because I didn't have that much time. There's only so much of you. So that's a challenge for those of you you've been doing it a while. You want to wake it up. Try doing the psalm, and I'll see if I can't scan it in and send it out with the class link, whether it's tonight or in the morning. So let me go back to sharing now that I've shared the Psalms. Oh, so that's the explanation. Is when I put that psalm on there is a reason for it. And so I wasn't sure what to entitle this, but I wanted something I could carry over into the Women of Valor Torah study at the end of the week. And their theme is image bearing. You know, how are we bearing the image of the Father? And I think in our generation, it's especially challenging because we're in a graphic age. We are in an age of images. In fact, probably if you moved your mouse or your finger over your trackpad on your laptop right now, it would pop up certain images, symbols, icons, things that send a message with a picture. And so that's kind of what an idol does. It sends a message with a picture. And it forms an image in your head of what God might be. And that's where we get into trouble, is when we get the wrong images. And ultimately, I think what we're going to find out is this idea of graving or engraving idols all along was very thinly disguised practice of worshiping ourselves, because they always have a human form or human characteristics that are blended in with other things, maybe with animals, maybe with heavenly bodies, these sorts of things. But at the heart of it, it's simply making the human being the God. And we're going to look at some scriptures that hint at that, which will be the usefulness of the psalm this week. And so we'll kind of say Sukkot in general will be our theme, since it's mentioned in the Torah portion. And if we're going to bear his image, and Sukkot is the culmination, it's the destination of our journey in terms of these foot feasts that he's talking about. If we walk along the way, his way, that way is ultimately going to take us to Sukkot, to the Feast of Ingathering, where we're told, you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you, your sons, and your daughters. And if that's the destination, then bearing his image as a human being is the challenge from Passover to Sukkot. And if you notice, when the Torah portion started out, you have the blessing and the curse. So you could arrive at the time of Sukkot and find out that you're not really prepared for Sukkot. That somehow Sukkot is going to elude you. And so at the beginning of the Torah portion, you have the pronouncing of the blessing, you have the pronouncing of the curse, you have Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim, and so there is blessing and cursing that are the possibilities based on behavior in the land. And this was something they needed to do in the land. It was very important. Not that it's not important what you do outside the land. It's very important what you do outside the land. But there is a heightened level of responsibility when you go into the land of Israel because of what it represents in the spiritual realm. So he's saying, okay, you've gotten away with a lot wandering out here in the wilderness, but you need to understand the first thing you need to do when you go in is to acknowledge verbally that how you behave yourself in this place can bring on blessing or it can bring on curse. In other words, he gives you the two extremes. If you act at the worst extreme, obviously you're going to have the worst curses. If you act at the best extreme, then you're going to have the best blessings. Those things will follow. And so my question was, how often are we between two mountains with things? And I'm not talking about the things we don't know. There's still a lot of Torah we don't know and understand, and we got to be okay and happy with that for the moment, because Torah really is something that is revealed to you little by little over your lifetime. You can get the fundamentals down, but once you get the fundamentals down, then you realize, there's a reason why the heavens are so high, because of how infinite this word is. Nevertheless, the things that are revealed to us, we have to live according to those things that are revealed to us. The problem is, as human beings, we do get in that rut that I was talking about. We can be gung-ho, I'm going to get in the Torah, I'm going to study the Torah portion every week, I'm going to pray 3 times a day, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And if we set those goals too high, or if we allow the cares of the world to interfere with those commitments, then we may find out we're just coming in with an average. All right, on an average day, do I study as much Torah as I should do? Probably not. On an average day, do I pray as much as I should? Probably not. On an average day, do I run my mouth more than I probably should? Probably yes, we did. Right? But he showed us 100% in the Torah. He showed us 100% of what he expects, not just in the natural land, but as a preparation for a supernatural existence in the garden. He wants to restore us in the garden. And as long as we have these average and below average behaviors, then we're not going to be very happy with an existence in the garden, because that existence, everything within that garden would feel contrary to the residue of the rebellion and the apathy and wrong-headed thinking that we're all subject to. And so through his word, gradually he retrains us, he molds us, constantly provoking us to be better than average with his commandment, to be 100% committed, like we saw last week, to be committed even to the little things. There's no commandment too small for us to listen to. So again, in Reeh, and this is the pattern with Deuteronomy, he doesn't introduce a lot of new things. He reiterates the things that we've already been taught. Now, sometimes it'll add a twist, and it's fun to chase down these twists, because as you're reading them, my natural mind says, I've already read this before. Why is he wasting space telling me this again? That's the natural mind. But the spiritual mind says, yes, he's already told me this before, but he's telling me this again. This is a clue. All right, it's one of those Colonel Mustard in the library with a candlestick sort of things that you're just compelled to try to figure out, is there a reason there's a repetition? What is that reason? What am I supposed to learn from it? And so in Reeh, we get a lot of repetition, but he'll throw in something every now and then just to see if we were listening. And one of those things that I ran across when he was given the Passover instructions again, he says, from your flock and from your herd. And I said, from the flock and from the herd. And so I went to Rashi's commentary, and sure enough, he explains it, because of course, if there's anything out of place, Rashi's going to notice it. And so he brings up that Bakor, of course, there's the lamb, the Passover lamb. Then he says, and your herd. And so you're like, okay, it's either a lamb or a goat, but how can it be from the herd? Because specifically, Bakor is beef. It's like an ox or a cow or a heifer or a bull. It has been translated variously as any of those things, but we know it's bovine. All right. So how in the world all of a sudden is he introducing a bovine into a lamb meal? But Rashi actually had the explanation, and I thought, well, this is great. I'm glad I didn't have to figure it out by myself, because I was thinking, my goodness, all this time we've been thinking it's a lamb, but it's a lamb and a cow. Yes and no. The minimum we know is, as long as we have a place to offer it, and I've got a chart for you here in a second on one of the slides to show you when things might have been offered on a different altar than either in the Mishkan or in the Mikdash. There were different periods of time where there were different things going on, and hopefully I've got that squared away for you. But obviously they weren't eating beef in Egypt when they ate the Passover lamb. But we also know that there are new things introduced into the equation once they leave Egypt. All of a sudden it becomes very much incorporated in with the redemption of the firstborn when we talk about Passover. And we can see the seeds of it in Egypt, but my goodness, it is one of those things where he just goes on and on and on and on, saying the same thing over and over. And you're like, oh, why do I keep reading the same thing? Because he's introducing things that need to become embedded in our spirit so that we'll start to connect some dots there. In this case, the sages derived that because many people could register for one lamb, in other words, you didn't kill a lamb for each person or even each family, because really you just had to have a certain size morsel of the lamb for it to be qualified as having partaken of the Passover. And I want to say it was the size of an olive, was the minimum size. That's typically the rabbinic rulings. If something's as big as an olive, then it qualifies. So let's say you have a large number of people who are sharing a lamb. It's possible by the time you got your piece, you wouldn't have that much. And remember, you eat it reclining. You eat it as though you're a rich person. And then you have to make the blessing when you're full and you're satisfied. Then you make a blessing. But how can you make a blessing if you're still hungry? And so this little addition of you can eat from a cow, along with the obligatory lamb sacrifice, they're saying that this is how you can fulfill that requirement of becoming full so that you can make the blessing. And so some people say, well, I went to a Passover Seder and I didn't see any lamb, but, they had roast beef or they had chicken or they had fish, they had all this other stuff, and we had a big meal. But why did we have this big meal when we're only supposed to have bitter herbs and matzah and a lamb? Well, there's actually a meal aspect of the Passover. And so you will have another rich food, such as beef, which is specifically mentioned, to make sure that along with your Seder, you're having enough food so that by the time you do the blessing after meals at the end of the Seder, it's actually true what you're saying, that you are full, that you are satisfied, and therefore you are qualified to make that blessing. Because if you're still hungry when you make that blessing, then he has really not blessed you. And so he wants you to eat enough so that you truly feel that blessing, and you can make it with the proper gratitude for the provision, for the food. So that's just a little fun thing he kind of slipped in there on us, is yes, when you're having your Passover Seder, make sure you have plenty stuff to eat. I mean, don't sit there with a twig of parsley or something and think it's more holy. It's actually more in line with fulfilling the commandments, not to eat till you're busting at the seams, but to make sure you're satisfied so that your blessing, it can be meaningful. All right. Or if you live down south, they're always going to say, well, I'm just full as a tick. So we have the name of the Torah portion, which is Reeh, which means see this. Last week, it was more hear. And by hearing, we saw that one of the interpretations is accept. If I hear it, I accept it. And if I accept it, then I will do it. So where it was more of an auditory last week, this week he's bringing out the visual. And remember, we talked about the tefillin, where they're placed between the eyes. That's the positioning, is between the eyes on your head. So you've got two eyes. One can represent your natural eyes, and the other can represent your spiritual eyes. And as human beings, that is our unique creation. And we don't appreciate it because we're in such a fallen state. More often than not, we bemoan the fact of our natural bodies. Why? Because they get sick, they wear out, they're clumsy, they get too fat, and we can't eat the good foods we like. Or, I don't know, some people might be really blessed and they can't gain enough weight. But our bodies never cooperate really with what we want. So we tend to look at things with natural eyes, but he's saying, no, you have to balance that out with your spiritual eye, because he made us so unique in the creation. He made us able to access things in the spiritual realm that we do kind of overlook. There's a pun, unintended, because it's harder to see it in our fallen state. But once we are resurrected, and that, remember, it's all going to happen at one time with the righteous. And there's just a little offset, right? Because those who have already passed to the other side, those who are already in the garden, who are awaiting the resurrection of the dead, they will be transformed just a little bit faster than those of us who are still alive on earth when Yeshua returns for us. Why is that? Well, there's a little more building to do with their bodies, I think. We already have a body. Now, it's not a great body. Again, it's in a fallen state. It might be sick and lame and blind and all sorts of things. But we still have the working material. And remember, Yeshua, his goal in appearing to his disciples is, look, handle me, touch me. Let's have something to eat. I'm trying to show you that resurrection is not just floating around as a spirit. That's not how he created you. He created you as a human being uniquely so that his spirit could go into a physical body. And then that body was designed where it could live eternally, when it lived in obedience to the commandments, when it walked in the way of the commandments. There was no reason for there to be death in that particular state when we walked in light. But when we fell into the darkness, now it requires a resurrection. And so all too often, we don't appreciate the joy of being human, because there's lots of beings out there in the spirit realm. And there's an envy with some of those beings in the spirit realm. We saw that with the serpent in the garden, envious of the position of the human being. And so as we're getting into the question of idolatry, we know that the idols, they don't just represent human beings. They also represent demons, spirits. And it's so foolish to worship an idol. Because if we don't worship the idol, then that demonic spirit, it has no expression. It has no real access to our physical realm to enjoy it the way that a human being can. And that's why I say we underestimate the joy of being human and what it is to smell bread baking in an oven, because we do have noses and we can smell. We underestimate maybe, the sense of touch, the ability to feel different textures, to feel heat, to feel coolness, to be able to pet a dog, and feel the softness of the fur on a pet, to be able to hug another human being. We underestimate it, and those demonic spirits are in envy of that ability that we have. And so those things are going to go back together. The spirit, the soul, the body, they're going to come back into unity. And there will be a restoration of complete vision. And so he's not going to rip us away from a physical body and say, well, now you're going to be angels. He says you're going to be like angels. All right, you're going to be true servants of the Most High. But you are unique in my creation. And so we have to balance those two sides and keep reminding us that we have another eye. We have more than one eye. We have one eye on the natural physical realm, and then we have one on the spiritual realm. And we are learning, once Yeshua has brought us to himself, then we spend the rest of our lives learning how to reconcile the spiritual person inside of us and the physical person that it's housed in, knowing that eventually what we are housed in will be resurrected from the dead. And you can see that longing in the book of Revelation, where the souls are under the altar. And then in Jewish tradition, they're under the throne. And I think both are true. Because if the earth is his footstool, then you can see the upper heavens would be over where the souls would be held at the altar. And they're saying, how long, O Lord? Why? Because until the last soul comes in, there is no resurrection, because we're going to resurrect as one body. We're not going to resurrect one over here and one over there as one body. And they say, how long, O Lord? Because even though they have temporary garments that they're wearing in the garden right now, they're only temporary. And they want that resurrected body back, because until that happens, we can't really fulfill the purpose of Adonai and the original creation. And so that's going to be such a day of joy, not just to us, but to those souls who are waiting for their resurrection as well. So We have to balance that. Natural, physical. And so the paradigm of Re'eh, or see, is if we see, because that's how the Torah portion starts out, Re'eh, see, then we will be seen in the proper places, at the proper times, by the proper people, and by the only true Elohim. All right, none of these gods. He will see to it that we are seen as who we need to be seen as. Just like it says, we will see him, we'll know him as he is, right? And the same thing holds true for us. If you've ever, what was it, in the 70s or the 60s or something, they said that the hippies were out there trying to find themselves. You're not going to find yourself apart from the commandments. That's where you find yourself. But even then, sometimes we struggle. We go through seasons of life where we say, am I doing the right thing? Am I headed in the right direction? Am I fulfilling my purpose in life? Am I exactly where he wants me to be? Or am I 180 degrees off? You know, and it's good to have those seasons because it improves our hearing and our vision. We do need those self-checks. But that's the paradigm. If we will see his commandments, then at the end of the Torah portion, he says, you will be seen. And when he says you will be seen, it's because they're in Jerusalem, they're keeping Sukkot, they're doing it with the right attitude, at the right place, at the right time, with the right people, and serving the only true Elohim. That's how we are seen. The problem today is, and it's not that it hasn't happened in previous generations, it has in that generation's unique way. Our generation, up until this point, is very unique because we are inundated with images, things to see, messages in picture, messages in symbol, messages in text, messages, emojis. And it seems as though the more of that we do, the fewer real conversations that we actually have with human beings. It's like when the communication by text, email, phone, whatever, when that starts, that's when the conversations really stop. And I was thinking today about The Hobbit. I think that's the right book, or maybe it's Lord of the Rings. I don't know. It's been junior high since I read it. But there was this ring. And if you had this ring, you could be invisible. And of course, they were always fighting and having these battles over this silly ring that could make you invisible. And I'm wondering how relevant that ring would be to this generation. Because this generation wants anything other than to be invisible. This generation is looking for some sort of magic ring that draws attention to them. So they've changed the paradigm. Instead of, if we see to the commandments, then we will be seen by Adonai. It's like we've changed the whole conversation, and it's like, be seen, and then we will be seen. Do everything I can to be seen and get attention, and that's how I'll make sure I'll be seen. But there's a problem with that paradigm. And the problem is, it's not the paradigm of Scripture. It's getting things out of order a little bit. And so I just pulled up Fox News this afternoon when I was doing the slides and said, can I find any examples? And this is the headline I saw. And I put the little yellow arrow on there so you could see And I don't even know what all those mean, but I know one is a Facebook symbol, one is a tweet symbol, Twitter symbol. I don't know what the red one is. I don't know what the other one is. I know one's a print symbol and one's an email. So you've got these different ways that you could make sure this article is seen, apparently. You just click on one of those little thingamajigs and you can Facebook it or Twitter it or email it. You can share that article in some way. And the headline read, now I did not read the full article, and so I'm not sure what the content is. If it has statistics in it, beware. I think Mark Twain said there's lies, there's you know what lies, and there's statistics. So statistics can be worded, surveys can be worded in such a way as to completely skew the results. But I kind of suspect the headline's true. It says millennials, I don't know why we're pinning it on millennials because they learned it from somebody, but it says millennials care less about patriotism, religion, and family than previous generations, study says. Well, tell me what this Torah portion is about other than patriotism, a dedication to a land called Israel and a city named Jerusalem, religion, okay, in terms of walking out your faith, yes, and family, yes, you, your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, the stranger that is within your gates, the Levite. It's about building a family out of more than just genealogical connections. And so it's saying this generation cares even less about the things in this Torah portion than any other generation. Of course, I don't know how they surveyed any other generation, unless it was just like one before it. But I suspect it's in general true. What's contributing to that? Well, I think there's all sorts of contributors. All right, we can't pin it on one thing. Our education system is a mess. Media is a mess. A lot of parents are a mess. So I don't know that we pin it on any one thing. And in many cases, our places of worship are a mess. They're nothing more than social organizations. Nobody wants to hear the word no anymore. Nobody wants to hear the word boundary, commandment, judgment. They don't like those words. And I think we're seeing the result of that. And then the other thing I pulled up was Parkland, the mass school shooting. All right, and that's just representative of what's typically in our headlines. You know, it's mass shooting after mass shooting, and we don't even know how many they're stopping. If we knew how many they're stopping before they get started, it'd probably be closer than we know. So why is it okay in this generation? Not that there haven't been mass murders in previous generations, but it's contagious in this generation. I can't even imagine a thought process that says, I'm okay with basically defying God, rebelling against God, destroying his creation and going to hell. And while I'm at it, I'm going to take as many people with me as I can. And do they even know the scripture that says, I will require the blood? I will require human beings' blood, whether another human being takes it, whether an animal takes the blood. He requires of the blood. And there's not a lot of chances to fix that once you get to the logical end of, say, a mass shooting, because you're either going to shoot yourself or you're probably going to be shot. You know, a few of them survive to make it to court. But as much is out there that is trying to connect us with other human beings, I'm looking at all these symbols. I can Facebook somebody, I can Twitter somebody, I can, maybe that's a text, somebody, I can email somebody. The more capable I am of connecting with people, it seems the more disconnected we have become. Our emotional health is wrecked. You could pull up in any other newspaper probably, and California is going to be in the news with the excessive number of homeless. Most of them have mental health issues. There's no place for them to go. Many of them have drug issues. And drugs and alcohol make you stupid and dumb if you do them long enough. Drugs and alcohol bring on mental health problems. So it's like the more images we have access to, the more ways we have of getting attention and being seen, it seems like the more superficial our relationships are and the more willing we are to kill other human beings. So what's going on with this great number of images? There's a lot of seeing going on, but what are we seeing? It seems like the paradigm has flipped. We spent all this time seeing and trying very hard to be seen, but yet sin is proliferating. We're getting sicker and sicker. And we know it's because we live in a fallen world, and we know because, Scripture prophesies all of these things. And I can only imagine as a parent how hard it is to connect with your kids nowadays. I mean, you would almost have to go camp with them on top of a mountain to have, all these images taken away to where they can even focus and concentrate on the word. There's really no place your children can go that they're not inundated with images and challenges of making yourself seen. And, I've got a Facebook page, and I put the weekly teachings on there. Every now and then I put something personal on there because people tell me people like to know you as a person. I'm like, well, I don't know if they'd even like that, but, but I try to keep as much personal stuff as I can out of it, and still be human, because it seems like the world has gone in such a vile direction. It's like, I don't know. It's just like we make new ways to wound with the tongue, or literally to take up a gun and start shooting people. And like we saw in, what was the shooting a couple of weeks ago in Philadelphia where the guy was barricaded? Well, he knows where the police are because he's watching his whole thing unfold on Facebook Live. So there again, he's getting the attention. Attention, attention, attention. And we're demanding that people pay attention to us. Look at my posts. Look at my email. Look at my blog. Look at my Twitter. Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And we've got to go back to this Torah portion and say, what are the proper ways of seeing and being seen? Because whatever this is going on here, it's not good. And we've got to find a way to make it good. People are just seeking, begging, demanding, commanding attention. And I use that phrase from the Torah portion, in ways your fathers did not know. The things that we'll do on social media, if our grandparents or our great-grandparents knew what we did, they would flip over in their graves. You would never reveal those things to public. You just didn't. You minded your own business. I remember a line from Our Town. It was a play that we had to read in high school, and set around the turn of the century. And Emily's mother kept telling her, walk simply, just walk simply. Don't put on airs. Don't walk around so people will see you and pay attention to you. You might get the attention you don't want. Just walk simply, just be who you are. But we do have an empty spot where this Torah portion should be, and a great number of people, they've not been brought up in the Word. They don't know the Word. And if they don't know the Word, they're ignorant and they're undisciplined, because that's the only way that your soul can be disciplined, is for someone to plant that Word in you. And so when that happens, when this Word is not put in you, then you're going to go out and you're going to act out to fulfill those seeing needs. I think what this Torah portion is telling us, yes, we all have a need to be seen. We all have a need to be affirmed by other people. I mean, that's just part of being a human being. But when that attention getting becomes self-worship, it's never going to satisfy. You can't make enough posts. You can't get enough hearts on your post. You can't get enough opens on your emails. You can't get enough hits on your blog. You will never get enough. You will have to keep posting over and over like a drug addict. They have to take more and more and more of the drug to try to reproduce that first high. And that's what we're seeing with social media. People are so habituated, and they're constantly seeking that one great image that will give them more likes than they ever had before, that will give them more attention than they ever had before. So rather than functioning in the role that I think it probably should, which is to keep us connected with the people we love or who have a common interest. I mean, the whole idea is social. It's to help us socialize in a positive way, but instead it somehow becomes antisocial. But we'll know whether these things we're doing for attention. We've got new neighbors down the road here, and apparently lots of teenagers. And you can hear them coming, not when they're on our road, not when they're on the next county highway over. When they're on the next county highway over, we're talking about a mile away, you can hear them because they have the stereos in their cars turned so high. We had company last night. One of them drove by. He said, my chair's shaking. I was like, yeah, there's 3 of them that do that. And you never know what time of day they'll go by. Now, is that so that kid can hear his music? Or is it so he can be seen and be noticed? He's begging for attention. But you know what? He can never turn that music loud enough to satisfy himself and his attention needs. Because what those kids need is the Torah. They need purpose. And see, if they had purpose, they would be more aware of people around them and how to be pro-social, which is what this Torah is teaching, instead of doing things that are antisocial, that would drive people away. But yet I'm getting the attention. I might be annoying the entire Mount Zion neighborhood, that end of the county, all the way to the Rock Castle River, but I got my attention. He can never do that enough to satisfy. You will never make enough posts to satisfy. You will never get enough likes to satisfy. That's not what they're for. The way that we get the attention needs satisfied is to walk in this walk. See, with Adam and Eve, what did they think? If we eat this fruit, it's really going to satisfy us. It's really going to hit the spot. They have been eating, and their descendants have been eating that fruit ever since, and it has still never satisfied us. It's what we get from the tree of life that satisfies us. But because it's not appealing to our physical appetite or our spiritual appetite, just to our natural appetite, we don't recognize. And food teaches you that lesson. You will eat breakfast, and by lunchtime, you'll be hungry. Why? Because that food was not intended to satisfy you indefinitely. That's the nature, that's the lower nature. But remember, Yeshua says, if you drink of me, you'll never thirst again. That's pretty good water. Because if I go get a sip of water, I'll be thirsty again in a couple hours. So it's this word that we're reading. Like last week, he said, teach it to your children. Why? So they can start to understand true satisfaction. Not just a full belly at Passover, but to be spiritually satisfied. That we understand the difference. So in Scripture, being seen is not the goal. It's just a logical consequence of seeing to the commandment. You take care of the commandments, and you will be seen in the proper places by the proper people. He says in 11:26, see, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you listen to the commandments of the Lord your God, which I am commanding you today, and the curse if you do not listen to the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside from the way which I am commanding you today, by following other gods which you have not known. So there is the simple explanation. If you listen, you'll be blessed. And if you don't listen, if you turn aside from the way, you'll be cursed. But think of it too. It's also a blessing to see. And it's also a curse not to see. And so it's not just that, oh, I'll be blessed if I see, if I keep the commandments and see to the commandments. But it's a blessing to even see them. So many people do not see the commandments, and they're under a curse. And they're inviting curses. Why? Because they don't know what really satisfies. They don't know what is going to give them the attention that is proper and that's good and that's going to cause them to thrive. So that was the opening. And then here's the closing. Deuteronomy 16:16. 3 times in a year, all your males shall appear. That's Yira'eh, which means will be seen in the future. Your males will be seen before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, at the feast of unleavened bread, and at the feast of weeks, and at the feast of booths, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Right? So that's the culmination of things. If you will see to the commandments, it will culminate at the Feast of Tabernacles, at Sukkot. And you will be seen where? You will be seen in Jerusalem. You will be seen at the proper time, at the feasts. You will be seen by the proper people, which is fellow walkers in the way. And you will be seen by Elohim, the one true Elohim. And so those are the bookends. If you will see to the commandment, then you will be seen. Right? Now, this is not exclusive of women, even though it looks that way. Torah tends to give you the minimalist requirement, understanding that you can enlarge upon it. It's not adding to the Torah if the women come, because we know they did. That was part of it. Now, if it presented a hardship, then they weren't required to go. But we know even up in Yeshua's time, the whole family would go for Passover. You see that at the Feast of Weeks. You see that at Sukkot when they're doing the reading of the Torah. Well, everybody, even the little ones, had to hear it. So this is not exclusive. It's saying at a minimum, this is what needs to happen. And then you can grow out of that according to your needs, but he's not putting a greater burden upon families than what they can bear. And that's why I'm really cool with when people want to go to Israel, don't wait until the entire family can go. It's fine. Save up and send yourselves one at a time if it'll get you there faster, because there's something to be said for experiencing both with your family, and there's something to be said for experiencing it alone. I mean, not entirely alone, but like the spies. You really got to know who they were. Out of the 12, they were in mixed company, and 2 stood above the rest. And they did it for the benefit of their families. Those 2, their families would inherit with them. And so either way, I say get there however you can. But it's seeing and listening. Last week it was listening, this week it's seeing. You want to start encircling the land, right? You want to start moving with that motion of the rivers of Eden, because I know we just ran out of time, but I want you to see how many times this Torah portion mentions the place. Now, it's not mentioning Jerusalem by name, but it's calling it the place. Later, we'll find out the name is Jerusalem. Deuteronomy 12, 6 through 7. It says, you shall seek the Lord at the place which the Lord your God will choose from all your tribes, to establish his name there for his dwelling. And there you shall come. There you shall bring your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, the contribution of your hand, your votive offerings, your freewill offerings, the firstborn of your herd and of your flock. There also you and your household shall eat before the Lord your God, and rejoice in all your undertakings in which the Lord your God has blessed you. So you're getting a lot of Sukkot imagery there, especially when you talk about rejoicing. Deuteronomy 12:13, be careful that you do not offer burnt offerings in every cultic place you see, but in the place which the Lord chooses, in one of your tribes, there you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I command you. And it's from this repetition, there's a nickname for Jerusalem and the temple. It's called the chosen house or the choice house. Deuteronomy 12:17. You are not allowed to eat within your gates the tithe of your grain or new wine or oil or the firstborn of your herd or flock or any of your votive offerings which you vow or your freewill offerings or the contribution of your hand. But you shall eat them before the Lord your God in the place which the Lord your God will choose. You and your son and daughter and your male and female servants and the Levite who is within your gates, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God in all your undertakings. There's the rejoicing again. I mean, see the repetition here? Deuteronomy 12:26. Only your holy things, which you may have, and your votive offerings, you shall take and go to the place which the Lord chooses. Deuteronomy 14:22. You shall surely tithe all the produce from what you sow, from what comes out of the field every year. You shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God at the place where he chooses to establish his name. The tithe of your grain, your new wine, your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and your flock, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. Why is there no fear of Adonai in these people who just go out and shoot up a mall or a school or a business? Well, they don't have any fear of Adonai. They're not being seen at these feasts. They don't have the calendar that Reeh is teaching us. They're saying you need to be seen at Passover. You need to be seen at the Feast of Weeks. You need to be seen at Sukkot. And it's going to take you a lot of time in between those to prepare yourself for that appearance. They have no place to go, and they're seeking attention, not understanding there's no attention-getting behavior they can do that will ever satisfy that need, but to take in this word right here and to start walking in it. And once they do that, they will develop a fear of the Lord your God always, and they would never pick up a gun and go out and try to kill multiple people before they kill themselves. He says in Deuteronomy 14:26, you may spend the money for whatever your heart desires, for oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink or whatever your heart desires, and there you shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice, you and your household. Deuteronomy 16:2, you shall sacrifice the Passover to the Lord your God from the flock and the herd in the place where the Lord chooses to establish his name. You've got things to do. You should be busy. You should be busy all the time with this kind of schedule right here. You're busy either going to the place, being in the place, or getting ready to go to the place again. The commandments keep you busy. Deuteronomy 15:19, you shall consecrate to the Lord your God all the firstborn males that are born of your herd and of your flock. You shall not work with the firstborn of your herd, nor shear the firstborn of your flock. You and your household shall eat it every year before the Lord your God in the place which the Lord chooses. But if it has any defect, such as lameness or blindness or any serious defect, you shall not sacrifice it to the Lord your God. In other words, when you're offering these offerings, offer what you want your resurrection experience to be. You want to be resurrected lame or blind or, club-footed or, two heads, 3 front feet? Of course not. That's why you bring the best, because you want that to be a picture of how you want to resurrect. And that's how the perfection of the word, constantly taking in that word to mold you into that perfect sacrifice without blemish. Deuteronomy 16:5 says you are not allowed to sacrifice the Passover in any of your towns which the Lord your God is giving you, but at the place where the Lord your God chooses to establish his name. You shall sacrifice the Passover in the evening at sunset, at the time that you came out of Egypt. Deuteronomy 16. Verse 10, you shall celebrate the Feast of Weeks to the Lord your God with a tribute of a freewill offering of your hand, which you shall give, just as the Lord your God blesses you. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son and your daughter and your male and female servants and the Levite who is in your town, and the stranger and the orphan and the widow who are in your midst, in the place where the Lord your God chooses to establish his name. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes. Okay, here you get the fuller picture, whereas in another context it says your males at a minimum have to do it. In Deuteronomy 16 here, it's much more expansive. You, your son, your daughter, your male, your female servants, the Levite, the stranger, the orphan, the widow. In other words, when we celebrate these feasts, whether right now we're doing them in the exile, or whether we have an opportunity to go to the land and to celebrate them at some point, wherever you're observing it, there's a fundamental truth. You need to remember your former state. And your former state was death. Before Yeshua intervened, our former state was death. And if we will remember that we were dead, then we will also remember that our future state is resurrection. And that's what we got to keep our eyes on, our future state of resurrection. And see if we can get people into this cycle of the feast with the power of the Holy Spirit, we can't do it in a dead way. It won't work. They'll know if we're dead. They'll know if we're not truly rejoicing. And that's the disturbing thing about social media. An outsider, let's say a good Southern Baptist, can pull up pretty much any Hebrew roots meeting place, look at the conversations that take there in full public view, and realize these people aren't worried a bit about a future state of resurrection. They're just worried about debating points of doctrine. Next, because that couldn't possibly be fulfilling. That couldn't possibly fill this empty place inside of me. So we need to be very careful how we negotiate our arguments. And they're not necessarily arguments. Sometimes we're trying to learn from one another. Somebody's going to bring out a point. Somebody else is going to bring out a different point. And you know what? In the long run, they might all have a very valid point. But when an outsider looks at an insider argument, it takes on a completely different appearance. And if you don't believe that, read Pharisee, Friend or Foe. Because there are so many arguments in the Gospels that have been completely misconstrued because it was an insider argument that we know. We can go back to the Jewish sources and say, oh yeah, it's a Shammai Hillel thing. Well, the average person doesn't know that. And so they don't always have the maturity to deal with the argument without coloring that argument through their own filter and what they expect to find. So, there's a lot of things maybe can be done in closed groups. Most stuff should be done face-to-face anyway. I've never known anybody that got persuaded about something on social media, other than probably they needed to take down their account. But we've lost the true Facebook, which is face-to-face, sitting down together and going through the scriptures together. It takes the humanity out of these sessions we could have with one another. What does this mean? And we get bogged down in the detail, and we forget to remember we were a slave in Egypt. We were dead, and now we're alive. And we have to look forward to a future state of resurrection. There's a hope there that people are losing in droves. Anybody who goes out and kills 20 or 30 people before they kill themselves does not have hope in a future state of resurrection. Deuteronomy 16:15, 7 days you shall celebrate a feast to the Lord your God in the place which the Lord your God chooses, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce, all the work of your hands, so that you will be altogether joyful. And that's the great thing about Sukkot. It's going to bind even strangers together. It brings you face to face in Jerusalem, and try it if you haven't. Go to Jerusalem at Sukkot and see if this is not true. It brings you face to face with people of other tribes, different economic circumstances, different colors, different dialects, different ways of dressing, everything. There's no individual rightness that's going to call that meeting. It is the righteousness of Adonai that calls that meeting. And compare the meeting of Sukkot to any other meeting, any other organization you know of. And there's no comparison. Because as long as human beings are setting the rules as to who gets to gather and who gets to share in the joy, it's not going to fill that void. You're still not going to be as important as you think you are. But see, the joy of Sukkot is that everybody is important, no matter who you are. whether you're the person who arrived because you have so much you need to share it with others, or whether you're a person who arrives and it's been a bad year and you need somebody to share with you. It's all equal. And there's a joy in that, that I don't have to be ashamed that I park this really old rundown RV next to somebody that has, you know, they can watch movies on the side of theirs, and it has a patio built into it. There's no shame in that. I can rejoice that Adonai has blessed that person with that beautiful way of getting to their Sukkot gathering. I can be glad that anybody who manages to get into Jerusalem at Sukkot, no matter whether they rode halfway around the world on an $800 ticket or whether they got their first class on El Al, I don't care how they got there. I'm just happy that they got there. And that's the right kind of attention, because that's the attention that directs the gratefulness, the praise back to Adonai, that he could collect all these people. And it's because he called the meeting, not because, you know, the United this or that called the meeting, not because the association this or that called the meeting. No. Adonai calls these meetings. And if we will see to his commandments, he will see to it that we are seen. And it's not our righteousness that we rejoice in when we go. It's his righteousness. So I took this at Passover, and I wrote, joy takes place when others praise God for our gifts and our presence at the feast. Because each of those people had a story of how they were able to get there. Some had a harder time than others, but they each had a story. But we were all grateful and glad to be there. There was no home court advantage for any one of us. It was his feast, and we went to celebrate in his place and to give glory to his name. And if we had something, we shared it. If we needed something, we accepted it. We're not too proud. We're not resentful, because you know what? Whatever you bring into Sukkot or Passover, just understand that next year could completely change your circumstances. If you were the one who needed to accept, you might be the one who shares next year. And the one who had an abundance to share this year might need to accept help next year. And it doesn't matter. However we come in, we're thanking Adonai. Because eventually, left to our own devices, human beings will peel off. And their meetings will be called, well, if you meet this criteria, or if you believe this, or if you'll sign that. Conditions are placed. But Adonai calls the meetings of his feasts. And that's how he can satisfy our attention needs with the right people, not predators. And that's why it's such a grievous thing when predators do invade the love feasts, like it says in Jude. They're out there preying upon those people and their vulnerabilities. And so that's the time that we truly have to come together and take care of one another and rejoice with one another, instead of being jealous or resentful or stingy or whatever it is it may be. We have to see to one another. That's what these commandments are about. We have to see to one another if we want to be seen in the proper way. Because when we're seen in the proper way, really all people are seeing is the joy of Adonai inside of us. That's what we want them to see. Now, in that picture, you see individuals, but if you don't see the joy of Adonai in their faces to be there at Passover, I don't know how you couldn't see that. That was the happiest bunch. I mean, like I said, we were just tickled to be there. You know, however we got there. And we were tickled that the others were there. And every group is like that until the time that he brings us back as one, every one of us, to the place, to Jerusalem. And eventually to the New Jerusalem. But we have to learn these lessons in the natural realm so that they reflect what's in the spiritual realm above. Okay, I'm going to stop there just because of time.